Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about types of programmers. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, I've heard that there is a saying that goes, good programmers write code, great programmers write no code, and Zen programmers delete code. Can you explain this expression and give a few examples of this? And the short answer is yes, I can. The basic idea is that a good programmer, you write software to solve all your problems, and then you have the great programmers who understand that sometimes the right solution to a problem is not to write code, but rather to change the perspective of the people who are asking you to build something. And the Zen programmers, or I don't know where you are on the scale, are the people who realize that sometimes removing things is actually a better thing than anything else, that you need to actually remove features. And that is probably by far and wide one of the harder things to get through in certain organizations. So just let me explain here. When it comes to software development, there is this, there is this sensation of accumulation, and you think about this accumulation of code and features and specifications and so forth as something that is value building. It's very similar to how people who are usually very stressed or feel like there's an enormous amount of pressure on them all the time are usually the sort of people who fail to live in the moment. They usually plan out things, they have a lot of scheduled tasks and so forth, and the work just keeps on piling up. But the people who can kind of ignore all that and just kind of focus on one thing usually feel a lot better than the people who are swamped by different things they need to do basically at the same time. Now, software is a very similar sort of thing. Now, the thing is that people, in my opinion, very erroneously believe that just having software produces some type of value. So basically, creating new features and accumulating new features, it's very rare that you find people questioning whether or not a feature should exist, or especially if they're in sales or if they're in business development or anything like that. It's very, very rare that someone will just feel that, no, you know what, we shouldn't have this feature, or this is going to make things more complicated or so forth. Saying no in software development when you have customers and stakeholders and so forth is a very tricky thing. It's extremely hard. Sales, I would say, they almost never say no. They will say yes to pretty much. They are basically a human proxy between the customer and the developer team, and they will almost always, unless really on the side of the developers, go with what the customer wants, because from their perspective, for them, they are the people who need to go to the customer and let them down and damage their personal relationship with the stakeholder or the customer in this situation. And that is something that a lot of salespeople are really shitty at, because to them, they put in that's what their job is, to maintain a good relationship with this customer. And that's much easier if you're a yes man rather than someone who says no to something. But the problem when you say yes all the time is that you will very quickly accumulate legacy and problems and complexity, and this is where the idea of a good programmer comes in. A good programmer, as this saying states, can write code. And that is that basically the idea is that the more you accumulate, the more legacy and the more problems that you accumulate, the good programmer will simply just always be able to solve the problem. And that is, at least from my perspective, what this part of the saying actually is about. That regardless of situation, regardless of how complicated the request, you will simply be able to write new features or create code that actually accommodates the new request, right? Now, a great programmer will understand that if you just sit down and you start writing code based on what the salesperson said or based on what your customer said or something like that, and if you just leave it at that, you will accumulate legacy and problems a lot quicker, and often you won't actually be able to produce the thing that actually is desired. Because one thing that I've truly learned as a software developer is that the stakeholder almost never knows what they actually want. They may have a rough idea of what they want, but they don't know the specifics of how it's supposed to work. And that is one of the biggest challenges with software development, to figure out what the actual requirements are and what will actually solve the problem in the most efficient way possible. So when a stakeholder comes to me or comes to a programmer and says, hey, I need this and that, the programmer who are truly great at software development, they will start asking questions. They will just take a step back and say, okay, cool, I think I can do this, but I have a few questions. Have you thought about this, that, and that? And start firing questions back at the stakeholder. Because what you want as a great quote-unquote programmer is for the hidden requirements to kind of fall out of the bag. And that's only possible if you are really, really good at asking questions and setting expectations and requirements. It's actually, some people actually have this as a full-time job, to set requirements for a project, but as a programmer you kind of have to breathe that sort of thing when you get to a little bit of seniority in order to get all of these hidden requirements. And the thing that you are really after is to get to the end of the bag of hidden requirements, because you might actually figure out that by just asking the right questions, you actually figure out that this feature here isn't really needed, or that you already have something that kind of accommodates this thing, or that you at least avoided writing the wrong software. You might actually figure out that the stakeholder doesn't really understand what it is that they want themselves. So they should go back to the drawing board. Maybe you can help them, but they should rethink or educate themselves or research or do something to make a stronger business case and have a more clear picture of what it is that they actually need to build. Now that's the difference between a great programmer and a good programmer, because the good programmer will simply start writing code and get the feature to work, even though it might not actually end in the results that the stakeholder is after. Now a Zen programmer, the truly happy programmer, is the programmer who gets to delete code. And this is very, very tricky. It's a very tricky thing, because the thing is, usually from the perspective of a business person, the only value software brings is by existing. The more features you have, the better, because the more features you have, the more people you can sell your product to. Now the problem with that is that they don't understand that every feature has the potential to slow down the overall development process. You get more testing and you get more legacy code and so forth and so forth. These things accumulate very quickly. So if you ask me, at least Frederick, it's to me it's a very similar sort of mindset that you should have a very similar mindset to if you play something like Magic the Gathering or one of these card games. You are legally allowed to have as many cards as you want, more or less, but you want the lowest amount, the exact right amount of cards and the best cards possible to increase the likelihood that you will beat the other player and get the right cards at the right time. Software works the same way. You should, if at all possible, throw away old, fairly unpopular features, because it's costing you less and you can move faster if you have less features. You should only keep what truly makes the difference for your customers. But this is very tricky, because from a business person's perspective, they don't think that there's a cost to just having features around. And you have already invested all this time into building this thing. So throwing that code away, it feels bad. It feels like loss. It's like almost a primal thing. It feels like you're losing money or that you're losing something, but you're actually not. It's just like, it's more similar to losing weight. That's actually a much more accurate thing than saying that you lose money when you throw away features. So a truly Zen programmer who can convince a business person that, yeah, you know, this feature, it's pretty much unused. And if we throw all of that legacy away, you're going to have happier developers because they have less things to worry about. And we're probably going to be able to move a little bit faster because we don't actually need to make sure that this part of the system keeps on working. So what I want you to take away from this is that, at least from my perspective, this saying that great programmers write code, good programmers write code, great programmers write no code and Zen programmers delete code comes from this idea that a good programmer is the sort of person who will just they will always solve the problem, but they will do so without asking the right questions. That's what a great programmer does. A great programmer tries to ask the right questions of their stakeholders so they can figure out if there are hidden requirements or something that is unclear. And often they will actually figure out that the stakeholder doesn't actually know what it is that they're ordering, so they actually avoid writing the wrong code. That's what's key there. And the Zen programmer is the programmer who understands that the less code you have, the better. You should only have the minimum amount of code, the highest value code that you have, but still the minimum amount. Have a great day.